In 1856, quarry workers in a small valley in Germany were digging through a limestone cave when they hit something that stopped them cold. Bones, but not normal bones. A skull cap, heavy and thick, with a brow ridge so pronounced it looked almost animal. Limb bones that were thicker, denser, and stronger than anything found in a modern human skeleton. At first, the workers assumed they had stumbled onto the remains of a bear. They hadn't. What they'd found would force scientists to ask a question they were not prepared to answer. Because buried in that cave in the Neander Valley were the bones of a species that lived alongside our ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years. A species we would eventually name Neanderthal. And for over a century, we told ourselves a comforting story about them. That they were brutish, slow, less intelligent, evolutionary failures who lost the survival race to smarter, more capable humans like us. That story made sense. It explained why we're still here and they're not. But there was a problem. The deeper scientists dug into the evidence, the less that story held together. And what they eventually uncovered would suggest something almost unthinkable. That in several critical ways, the species we dismissed as primitive may have actually outperformed us. Which raises the real question at the center of this investigation. If Neanderthals were truly inferior, why did it take modern humans tens of thousands of years of direct competition to outlast them? And what if the reason we won had nothing to do with intelligence at all? This isn't just a question about an extinct species, it's a question about what intelligence actually means for survival. Because for most of human history, being smart wasn't about solving equations or building computers. It was about staying alive in a world that wanted to kill you. Surviving ice ages, outthinking predators, healing wounds with no medicine, finding food when the land offered almost nothing. By every one of those measures, the evidence about Neanderthals doesn't look like the story of a lesser species, it looks like something else entirely. And once researchers started taking that possibility seriously, they uncovered a series of discoveries that would completely dismantle everything we thought we understood about who was really the more capable human. Start with the brain. For decades, the assumption was simple. Bigger brains mean smarter beings, and modern humans surely had the edge. But when researchers actually measured Neanderthal skulls, they found something that didn't fit that assumption at all. Neanderthal brains were not smaller than ours. On average, they were larger. This single fact created an immediate problem for the old story. If brain size was the measure of intelligence, and Neanderthals had more brain volume than early modern humans, then the simple narrative of "we were smarter so we won" couldn't be the full explanation. Scientists pushed back, of course. They argued that a larger brain doesn't necessarily mean more advanced thinking. Much of that extra volume, they suggested, went toward processing enormous eyes adapted for low light in Ice Age Europe and toward controlling a heavier, more muscular body. That explanation made sense for a while. But then scientists discovered something unexpected. When researchers began studying Neanderthal tools and living sites more closely, they found evidence of behavior that should not exist in a primitive species. Neanderthals weren't just surviving with crude stone tools. They were crafting specialized weapons, adapting their technology to different prey, and in some sites, producing tools so refined that early researchers initially assumed they were made by modern humans. And it didn't stop at tools. In a cave in France, archaeologists found something that sent shockwaves through the field. Deep inside the cave, far from any natural light source, lay broken stalagmites arranged into deliberate circular structures. This wasn't damage from collapse or erosion. The pieces had been intentionally snapped to a similar length and stacked into a precise formation. The site was dated to over 175,000 years ago, before modern humans had even reached that part of the world, which meant the only beings capable of creating it were Neanderthals. And to build something like this, deep underground, without natural light, they would have needed fire. They would have needed the ability to carry that fire safely through a cave system. They would have needed planning, cooperation, and a reason to do something that had nothing to do with hunting or eating. This is where the story gets strange. Because if Neanderthals were incapable of abstract thought, Why would they venture deep into total darkness to build something with no survival purpose at all? The evidence didn't fit the old narrative, and it was about to get even harder to explain away. The cave structure was strange enough on its own, but it forced scientists to ask a much bigger question. If Neanderthals were organizing material into deliberate patterns underground, what else were they capable of? That question led researchers to look closer at Neanderthal burial sites. And what they found challenged one of the last assumptions standing. In a cave in Iraq, the skeleton of a Neanderthal was discovered surrounded by clusters of ancient pollen. For years, researchers debated what this meant. One interpretation was almost too remarkable to accept, that this individual had been buried with flowers. If true, it meant Neanderthals weren't just disposing of their dead to avoid disease or predators. They were marking death with ritual, with meaning, with something that looked uncomfortably close to grief. Critics pushed back hard on this idea. Some argued the pollen could have blown in naturally, or been carried by burrowing rodents. The debate raged for years. But then more burial sites turned up, and a pattern began to emerge that was harder to dismiss. Bodies positioned carefully, limbs arranged in deliberate poses, sometimes accompanied by tools or animal bones placed with what looked like intention rather than accident. This created a serious problem for the old narrative. Burial ritual implies something extraordinary. It implies a species capable of abstract thought about death. A species that understood loss not just as the disappearance of a useful group member, but as something worth marking, worth remembering. And if Neanderthals were capable of that kind of thinking, the gap between them and us started to look a lot smaller than scientists had assumed. But the most damaging blow to the old story didn't come from caves or burial sites at all. It came from medicine. Researchers studying Neanderthal skeletons began noticing something remarkable. Individuals who had survived horrific injuries. A leg shattered so badly it should have been a death sentence in the wild, healed and reset. A skull fractured on one side healed over years of life afterward. Bodies covered in old, healed wounds that would have left a person unable to hunt, unable to walk, unable to contribute to the group for extended periods. In the brutal calculus of survival, an injured member who can't hunt is a liability. Nature doesn't usually keep liabilities alive. And yet, here was evidence over and over again of Neanderthals who had been cared for, fed, protected, nursed back from injuries that should have ended them. This wasn't just intelligence. This was something that looked a lot like compassion, which meant the species we had spent a century picturing as brutish, simple, and savage may have built something modern humans take enormous pride in. A society that took care of its wounded. And that raised an uncomfortable question that scientists could no longer avoid. If Neanderthals were this capable, this adaptable, this socially sophisticated, why aren't they here today? The obvious answer seemed simple. Modern humans must have outcompeted them. Better tools, sharper weapons, faster spread across the landscape. The answer seemed obvious. It wasn't. Because when scientists compared the actual technology used by both species during the period they overlapped, the differences were nowhere near significant enough to explain a total extinction. Neanderthal tools were sophisticated. Their hunting strategies were effective enough to take down massive Ice Age animals, including mammoths and woolly rhinos, creatures capable of crushing a human body in seconds. If their tools weren't drastically inferior, and their brains weren't smaller, and their social structures showed signs of cooperation and care, something else had to explain their disappearance. This is where genetics entered the investigation, and where the story took its strangest turn yet. When researchers finally sequenced the Neanderthal genome, they made a discovery that didn't just challenge the old narrative. It shattered it completely. Modern humans of European and Asian descent carry Neanderthal DNA, not a trace amount. In many people, it accounts for 1 to 4% of their entire genetic code. Think about what that actually means. It means modern humans and Neanderthals didn't just coexist in the same hostile, freezing landscape. They had children together, repeatedly, across generations, across different regions of the ancient world. Neanderthals weren't a separate, failed branch of humanity that simply died out while we marched on. They were absorbed into us. And this is where the deepest twist of the investigation reveals itself. Some of the Neanderthal genes that survive in modern humans today aren't random leftover fragments. They're functional, active. Some of them are linked to stronger immune responses, helping our ancestors fight off diseases in unfamiliar environments they were migrating into for the first time. In other words, Neanderthal biology may have helped save the very species history credited with replacing them. So if they didn't lose to us in some grand battle of intelligence, and their genes still protect us today, what actually happened to them? The most likely answer is one of the most sobering truths in human history. Their population was simply smaller, spread thinner across a brutal landscape. And when modern humans arrived in larger numbers, generation after generation of interbreeding and gradual absorption may have done what war and competition never could. Their bloodline didn't vanish. It dissolved into ours, which means the species we spent over a century mocking as the dim-witted ancestor who lost the evolutionary race wasn't inferior at all. They built tools precise enough to be mistaken for our own. They ventured into darkness to build structures with no survival purpose. They buried their dead with what may have been the earliest form of grief ritual on Earth. They kept their wounded alive through injuries that should have killed them. And when the two species finally met, history's verdict wasn't extinction. It was union. Somewhere in your own DNA, if your ancestry traces through Europe or Asia, there may be a fragment of a brain that built something underground in total darkness 70,000 years ago, with purpose, for reasons we still don't fully understand. So the next time you hear someone called a Neanderthal as an insult, remember what the evidence actually says. We didn't outsmart them. We became them. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into our ancient past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.